Okay, great. Thank you all for joining our traffic council meeting for April 27th. At the beginning of well, I'll introduce myself. I'm David Kozis, the transportation coordinator for the Department of Public Works. And I see that at the beginning of the meeting, we're joined by Captain Doucette of the Newton Traffic Bureau. We have Isaac Prezant, our city traffic engineer. We have our citizen representative, Mitch Fishman, and our citizen backup, Jeremy Freudberg. We have Danielle Delaney, our city clerk. I see Councilor Laredo from Ward 7, Jeannie Fairley, our ADA coordinator, and we may be joined by a city councilor as our 5th member of traffic council. So we're going to just move to our first item of the evening. We'll start with the presentation and then we can open it up for public comment. So our first item of the evening is TC 4322. It's Jill Charney, 671 Grove Street, requesting to review and assess a change to the parking regulations on Grove Street between Washington Street and Colgate Road. So this item has been heard. This is the 3rd time that we're hearing this. We heard it back in September of last year. It was held for a trial. Then it also was discussed in at our February traffic council meeting and held at that point as well, with the trial continuing. So this is the area of Grove Street that we've been talking about down by Washington Street, that first block or two. This is a view. Some of these slides were from the September meeting when we first heard it. So this is what the street looked like back in September of last year, up until that point. You see, can you all see my cursor moving? Yeah, okay. So until more recently, we had a parking restriction on both sides of the street. But this is unusual that it was only posted on the one side on these utility poles because it was too difficult to post signs on this side of the street because of the narrowness of the sidewalk and the stone walls, whatever. I think signs we tried in the past years ago, they would just be knocked down. So we had signs that said no parking on either side from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., except Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. So that was in place for a long time. But we also knew that the street really was not wide enough to allow parking on both sides. You could park on both sides legally anytime, after 11 a.m. or on the weekends. And if we had people parking on both sides, it would become a safety issue. So we knew that was a difficult situation that we needed to address. And so it's only 20 or 21 feet wide, that street. You can't have parking on both sides, even though it's a one-way street. So back in September, we took observations. We noticed that, I took 5 observations. At the times that I was there, I saw between 3 cars or 6 cars parked always on the east side of the street. We didn't really see cars parked on the west side, only on the east side. We saw cars that were parked even during the restricted hours, the 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. We know that there were residents of the street that got parking tickets for parking on their street between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. And they were not happy about that. They wanted to be able to park on their street during those hours. So we undertook a trial where we allowed unrestricted parking on the east side of the street, and we used the utility poles to post no parking at any time on this side. And so that trial has been in place since September of last year. The observations that I took in January and February, in advance of the last time this was discussed, was pretty much the same number of vehicles that were parked when we first looked at it, and with the old regulations in place, sometimes as low as 0 vehicles. I never saw more than 5 or 6 vehicles parked on the street. one time there was a car on the wrong side, but generally they're always parking on the east side of the street. So this item was held back in February. We're hearing it again now. One thing that we did between February and this meeting was we came up with a pavement marking plan. So it's, Grove Street is one way. It's one way here, it's one way on this side of the island. It's a little unusual to have this island right in the middle. And then it's also one way, continuing on Grove Street. Moulton Street is two ways, so you do have cars that are coming down this way. And then, a lot of times we would see cars continuing down in the wrong direction, down to Washington Street, or coming out of a driveway and traveling in the wrong direction of Grove Street down to Washington Street. That was not safe. We didn't want to see that. So we think that this pavement marking plan could help a lot. We could paint arrows in the street indicating that it's one way. We could sort of extend the island with pavement markings, and we can mark where the parking spaces are actually allowed as part of this trial. So parking would not be allowed on this side of the island, but it would be allowed on this side of the island in these two spaces. So our recommendation is to make the trial permanent, keep the signs as they are now, add the new pavement markings. And we have the language to allow us to vote today. I'm going to open it up now for public comment. Anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this? And maybe Isaac, again, you could just help me to see if anyone raises their hand and wishes to speak on this item. And I see now that we're joined by Councillor Downs. Good evening, Councillor Downs.
Yeah, Jill has her hand up.
Okay, thank you. Jill Charney.
Okay, well, I am a resident of Grove Street, and you see that red fire box. Our house is directly at like 11 o'clock behind it. So I think the people on the street are okay with this regulation, no parking on the west side and unrestricted on the east side. It seems to mostly affect us across the cars are pretty much lined up. The numbers that you took before, David, are kind of low for what they're like now. There's probably 5 or 6 cars on that east side and in front of that stone wall. And most of the day, the cars are all lined up. I think people, park there, they go across the street to National Development, they go across the street to Starbucks, or they are visiting people in the brick condos on the corner of Grove and Washington. So it's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. I would like to say that putting some signage to make sure that nobody goes down our street the wrong way, like you were pointing out, David, coming from Moulton. Some people go around and they go toward Washington Street from Grove. It is very dangerous for people coming in from Washington, especially people are kind of nervous about coming off of Washington. There's a lot going on right at that corner with Starbucks right there. So that's an issue. And there are people from the brick condos that also go down. And I don't know where that signage would be, because for them, my guess is you said the one-way sign would probably be north of the first parking spot, so that people, when they come down from Moulton, they know not to take a left on Grove. I'm not sure how the people from the brick condos would be reminded. I mean, they should know already, but be reminded. So that would be my only concern. And so I would like to support the plan to keep it as is, and then to create signage for one way.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to hear that. So I think that we would keep the current signs, the one-way signs that we have now. We would take another look just to make sure that they're clear, and we would paint arrows in the road like you see here. So if you're
Yeah.
coming down Moulton, you should see an arrow pointing in the wrong, like making it very clear that you're not
Yeah.
supposed to be traveling in the opposite direction. An arrow on this side of the island and on this side of the island. I think it's going to become much more clear with this type of pavement marking plan. And I also have a question for you, Ms. Charney. So we've noticed that we've specifically wanted to allow parking right here. We felt it was wide enough and it could maybe move a couple of the cars that park further up, down, further into these two spaces. Do you see this marked space right here and this
Yes.
one?
Mhm.
We've noticed that no one parks there
Yeah,
because they probably don't know that they can. So I think that that would help as well to mark the spaces. Some of the cars could park there instead. They would just need to know that they can't, go out Grove Street the wrong way. They need to continue in the correct direction. So I
Well,
think that that might help as well.
help with what? With people coming down from Moulton and not taking a left, but taking
Yes.
only a right? That this
Yes,
would be
because
it'd be kind of narrow for them to be.
it's
Right.
another indication that there's a car pointing in the northbound direction. Right, and
Right.
I think it would
Mhm.
also help maybe by moving a few, like one or two of the cars
Mhm.
even closer, closer down in front of this building and not further up Grove Street.
Do you think there is enough width
Yes,
to?
yes, we had two traffic engineers take a look at that.
Okay, so fire trucks
And
yeah.
plus this painted area right here is just gonna be paint. See this
Oh,
white
uh-huh.
lines,
Uh-huh.
so you could drive over it if it's a truck or something.
What do you think about people in the brick condos complaining that there's cars in front of their sort of basement windows, or that's where some of the condos
To me,
begin?
it seems like an appropriate place to park. I think it's a public street, and I
Yeah.
think that we have parking on most of the streets in
Yeah.
Newton for all different
Yeah.
reasons. And
Yeah.
this is just another street in Newton that can have parking.
Yeah, it looks kind of narrow on this plan, but since you know that all the experts have looked at the width, then that
Well, you
would
see
be
this 11 right here. It means that there's
Yeah.
11 feet in
right.
between
Right.
where the car would be parked and
Mhm.
where the painted area would begin.
Right.
And even probably like 11 more feet until you get to the island.
Right. So it looks like it makes sense. I don't know whether your assumption is correct that it would take some of the cars off of, across the street from us, because it would just, I think, add more. And there'd be more people from Starbucks that, oh, this is convenient, this is closer. Anyway, but regardless, it would be another opportunity for some parking.
Okay, thank you very much. Jesse, I see your hand is up.
So looking at that pavement marking plan that was made, and you mentioning that it commonly happens that people coming down Moulton take a left and go the wrong way down Grove Street towards Washington. I would actually like to see something different happen. I would like to see that where the island is, it's actually made into a roundabout and actually allow people coming out of Moulton to make a left and allow people coming out of that driveway to make a right, and paint a double yellow line down to Washington and paint a stop line behind the crosswalk at Washington.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. Can you just say your address for the record?
64 Oak Cliff Road, Newton, Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you. And I want to just remind you that Traffic Council does not have a budget, right? We don't have a budget for any kind of construction. We just have a budget for, stop signs and signage and paint, that kind of thing. So definitely Traffic Council cannot be approving, anything with a significant cost to it, as we all know. Councilor Downs.
Thank you, Chair. And sorry it's late. I'm just getting dinner. I think this looks fabulous, and it's a trial. So if it really doesn't work, we go back to the drawing board and start again. Perhaps an arrow out of Moulton Street that's a right turn only might be helpful, but just looking at the map there. But go ahead and try with the 2 arrows you've got, and well, let's hope it works.
Very good, thank you. Any other comments from the public or from members of traffic council? We do have the language in front of us that we've prepared to be able to vote on this tonight. We would be removing the existing regulations on Grove Street and adding this new set of regulations to reflect the changes that we've just discussed. This would be, Danielle, I believe it would be TC 871. That's where we're starting tonight, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I would like to just go ahead and make the motion to approve the language of TC 871 for this item, TC 4322, to make the trial permanent. And are there any comments before we vote? Okay, seeing none. Danielle, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Kosis,
Aye.
Mr. Prezant,
Aye.
Captain Doucette,
Aye.
Mr. Fishman,
Aye.
and Counselor Downs.
Aye.
Okay, that's approved 5-0, TPR 871.
Thank you very much. So we have the 20-day appeals period, but nothing really would change because we already have the signage in the field. It would just be staying there unless there happens to be an appeal filed, in which if there is, then this item would be reconsidered, but it seems unlikely at this point. So thank you all very much. And we're going to move on to our next item, which is TC 1622. This is Barney Heath, Director of Planning and Development, and David Kosis, Traffic Council Chair, requesting to change the distribution of parking spaces in the Lexington Street lot in order to accommodate pneumo vehicles. Okay, so I just wanted to start out with, this is a map of one of our parking, our village parking districts. This is the one for Auburndale, for the village area of Auburndale. And I just wanted to start out by just highlighting where the Lexington Street lot is located. So you could see that there's an orange line and a blue dash line and a pink dash line. So that means that in the Lexington Street lot right now, we have some spaces that are orange, the Auburndale business permits, and we have some spaces that are 2-hour metered spaces, the pink ones, and some spaces that are 12-hour metered spaces in the Lexington Street lot right now. I also wanted to highlight where the Auburndale business permits are located. They're the areas shown in orange, so that we have some in the lot. We also have an area right here on Melrose Street where employees who work in Auburndale would be able to get a permit and park there, $25 a year. Also, stretch of Auburn Street and quite a long stretch of Central Street. There's a lot of availability in this area. It's quite available for Auburndale employees to get permits and park in these areas. So this is the Lexington Street lot right now. It's very underutilized. It might be our only city lot that I can think of that's really, really underutilized. I did several observations. I only saw 17% of the lot occupied. There's 41 spaces. Sometimes there were only 7 cars parked there or 11 cars. And out of those, the majority by far are, the permits. Those people who work in Auburndale for, $25 a year, they're not paying the meter. They have their $25 permit, or pneumo vehicles themselves, or pneumo drivers who are parking there and not paying the meter right now. So I usually see about 2 pneumo vehicles in this lot. We have pneumo vehicles parked in different places in the city. There's some in our DPW parking lot over here on Craft Street. I see some pneumo vehicles at 150 Jackson, which is going to be the new Lincoln Elliott School. So they're sort of all over the place. Pneumo, as we know, is quite successful. It's expanding. and increasing the number of vehicles. And we were looking for a place to consolidate all the vehicles in an area that has availability and that has chargers, because we have right now a mix of EV, electric vehicles, and in the future, more electric vehicles. Numa will be operating more electric vehicles. So the recommendation is to consolidate the Numa vehicles into an area of the Lexington Street lot that I can show. Maybe I'll just go to the next slide. It might be easier. So this is what we're recommending to change in the Lexington Street lot. So we're recommending that the area of short-term parking meters stay exactly where they are right now, closer to the businesses. And don't forget, the other side of the businesses is free parking, right? On Auburn Street, it's free parking on both sides of Auburn Street, just on the other side. So that's probably why very few people are parking in this lot when they could just park for free very close by. So the recommendation is to leave the short-term meters where they are now and leave the long-term meters where they are now in the lot, to leave the pay station where it's located now, to leave the accessible parking spaces where they are now. This little area is actually owned by Village Bank, so that's not part of the public lot right there. We recommend this area right here, which is not actually inside. Oh, sorry, let me go back. There's spaces, you can sort of see these angled spaces down here. You get there off of this street. You don't go into the lot. It's considered part of the lot, but the spaces are right here. And their this is the employee permit spaces that we saw at the first slide. So there's these spaces right now, the employee permit spaces that we're recommending to move up to here. So we would lose a few of the employee permit spaces, but don't forget, there's so much availability around in different areas where employees could park for $25 a year. I think that we're fine moving them up here and losing 2 spaces, and then reserving all these spaces for the Numa vehicles, right? We have one charger, we have actually 2 chargers right now. The plan is to add some additional chargers right here. And what's great is that the Numa vehicles could park on either side, really, and use the chargers. We want to make some level of charging available to the public. So we want, when the Numa vehicles are out during the day, to allow people with electric vehicles to come in to, any of these new chargers that we're putting in and charge their vehicles during the day, sort of share these spaces. So that is what our recommendation is. What we would need to do, what Traffic Council would need to vote on, is to update this little chart in our traffic and parking regulations. You can sort of see it. We would be changing the number of spaces in the Lexington Street lot. Instead of 15 short-term spaces, we would have 11. Instead of 16 long-term spaces, we would have 11. We would keep the 2 accessible spaces. And instead of having 6 spaces that are in this column called reserved by permit or other, we would have 17. And so those 17 are sort of the combined employee spaces plus the reserved spaces for Numa. So that's really what we need to actually vote on to make this happen. I think it's the highest and best use for this very underutilized lot. And I think it makes a lot of sense. So that is our recommendation. We would be voting to remove this old chart and to add in this new chart in its place. And we have an appeals period through May 17th. So we can go on to public comment. Jeremy, did you want to comment first?
Yeah, if there's no one from the public, I can go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it helps to know that this is very underutilized right now. That makes me pretty comfortable with this. I was just kind of wondering, if just a member of the public doesn't move their car at 6 p.m., what happens? Because it's not clear to me how many EVs Numo has now and how many charging ports you have, but I could imagine that well, if you just could explain that again, because I mean, I see a number of spaces there, and I don't know if every one of them is associated with a charger, how that works.
So, I mean, this lot is really, really underutilized. So like, I'm not sure why someone would come into this lot and see all these empty spaces and then just park in the one space that says that they're not supposed to park there, right? So I don't know how likely that would be to happen. But I mean, if it does happen, I mean, I'm not sure. That seems like it's a what if. I suppose we could, think about how to solve that if it becomes a problem. I think that right now we would have a few more spaces reserved for Numo vehicles than we would need, but we also know that they're going to be adding additional vehicles moving forward. So
Right, no, I
all
think
of
you're
the
right.
vehicles
I
would
think
be
I think it is unlikely. I just was sort of curious about.
I think one thing that might be more
Yeah.
likely to happen is that the employees are used to parking in these spaces right down here. They've,
Mhm.
A lot of times you go into this lot, you see like one car parked here and maybe two Numo vehicles parked here, and then all of these employee spaces taken. So they might need to learn that they're not supposed to park there anymore and they need to park over here or, park over on Auburn
Right.
Street
So
instead.
could you just explain how many charging ports there are?
Is there anyone else that's here from planning? Let me just see it, because it's really planning that oversees.
Because this stuff hasn't been installed yet. I mean, there's the
No.
existing chargers, so.
So my
there-
understanding is that oh, go ahead, Isaac.
Yeah, I was just
Maybe
gonna
you know more
say,
than I do.
yeah, so there's currently one foundation base and electric cabinet basically ready for one charger to be put in that charges two cars. That should be coming in the next few months. And then over the course of probably a couple years, would be more of a larger transition to more electric Numo vehicles.
Right, and so right now Numo has a combination of electric vehicles and regular gas vehicles. And I think that they're required to slowly convert to all electric at hopefully the same pace that the new electric charging stations are put in.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, no, that's helpful. I think the fact that there's sort of like a long runway to this project will be helpful, and I think people will get used to it and not park there, because again, I don't want to have the situation where we're relying on the space being available, but then we have to actually tow someone out of there to use it. But I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that I'm really excited about this solution because, right now we have Numo vehicles in the DPW lot, which is very busy. Especially when there's, snow operations and things, there's a lot of equipment being moved in and out, and these Numo vehicles here. Then over at 150 Jackson, which is going to become a construction site, right? And then a new school, they can't really be there. So it really seems like a good place for them. Mitch.
Oh, so just following up on Jeremy's question. So during the day, so what would the signage say in that, I guess, that off yellow area during the day? It would say parking is allowed or parking is restricted, or what, I mean, if, for example, you come in and why would I pay a meter if I can park for free? Am I missing something?
Well, you would park there if you're charging your car.
But there's
you-
only a limited number of, so it's only for charging. as
These are only
opposed-
for charge. These would be reserved for Numo. So these ones on this side, reserved for Numo at all times. Right? So
At
the
all
signs
times,
would probably
okay.
say Numo parking only, right?
Yeah,
And then on this side, they
right.
would say, Numo, reserved for Numo vehicles only. Something like charging permitted, 6 PM to 7 AM. Or I'm sorry, 7 AM to 6 PM.
So it's all limited to Numo throughout the day. Is that? did I
We
miss
want to
something?
be able to allow, like during the day, most of these vehicle spaces would be empty. They're empty right now during the day. right?
Okay.
So we want, they are public chargers. So we want to allow charging. There's probably not a lot of charging that happens here, except for the Numo vehicles anyway, right? But I mean, that's the idea right now. I'm not sure exactly what the signs would say. They would be some sort of indication that the public is allowed to charge there during the day when the Numo vehicles are not there.
Okay, and they're all eventually, I mean, I heard Isaac talk about the limited number, but eventually they'll all be charging spots, right?
Yep.
That's the plan.
Good.
Any other questions on this? Comments? Okay. So I'll make a motion. Okay, so this would be, we have the language, it's TC 872. Right? Yeah,
David, I would just,
Yes,
Isaac, go ahead.
I would just say, forgive me if you mentioned it, it might just be worth noting that we did notify the ward counselors here as well.
Yes, we did. Yes, so they're all well aware of it. Yes, so thank you, Isaac. So yes, I'll make the motion to approve the language of TC 872 with this chart shown on page 22 of the presentation. To consolidate the Numo vehicles in this lot. We have until May 17th for an appeal. If we don't hear an appeal, then all the changes could be made in the lot on after May 17th. Any last comments? Okay, Danielle, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Kosis,
Aye.
Mr. Prezant,
Aye.
Captain Doucette,
Aye.
Mr. Fishman,
Aye.
Counselor Downs.
Aye.
That's approved 5-0 TPR 872.
Thank you. So the next item is TC 1323. This is David Kozis, Traffic Council Chair, requesting to replace the right turn on red after stop sign located at the Ward Street northeastbound intersection of Ward Street, Stewart Road, and Waverly Avenue with a no turn on red sign. Okay, so we'll do the presentation, then we'll open it up for comment. This is the area that we're talking about. This is Ward Street. There's a signal right here, kind of an awkward intersection. This is the movement that we're talking about. It's so Ward Street eastbound, continuing onto Ward Street. So here's what it looks like when you're on the ground. You're here, you're waiting for this, well, you're right here at this signal. There's a sign right there that says right turn on red after stop. So, you know, I would say in my life experience, this, to me, this feels like, it doesn't feel like a right turn. It feels like you're driving through a red light and crosswalks to get to the other side. Other people feel through, I guess, their life experience that this is more like a right turn. Okay, it's, you know, it's not 90 degrees. You know, you're not coming to this light and turning this way, right? It's not a 90-degree turn. It's not 180 degrees. You know, you're not driving into this house. It's something in between, like, I don't know, it's unusual. It's like 180 or like 130, I guess, degrees or 140 degrees or something like that. So different, I feel like different people understand this to be a right turn or maybe not a right turn. And that's, I'm sure that that's why we have this sign here that says right turn on red after stop, because if we didn't have a sign there, you know, I think that this sign indicates that this is supposed to be a right turn on red, right? If there was no sign, I don't know what people would think. Would they think that they're turning right, or if they're going straight? I'm not sure. But it's been there for a very long time. And the reason that this is docketed, we had a request from a resident to docket this because it was confusing. And, you know, we looked at it and we thought that there is some potential for, you know, for conflicts here. If you think about, you think about this red car that's coming down from Waverly, they come down here, there's a traffic signal, it's red, they wait for it to turn green, and then it turns green, and then they take the left onto Ward Street. At the same time, you have this yellow car coming from Ward Street. They come to the signal, there's a sign that says that all they need to do is stop, and then they can continue. So they stop, and then they continue, possibly at the same time that this car's coming down and making the left on the green, or this car, coming down from this green car, coming down from Stewart, waits for the green light, then they proceed sort of through, hopefully on the correct side of the island right here. At the same time that this yellow car, I don't know, they would have to look way behind them to see if there's a car traveling. This green car, it would be hard for them to even see, but they might both be going through at the same time. So there is a potential for crashes. There have not been a lot of crashes. We looked at it over the past several years. I think there's only been 2 crashes in the past 2 years, or 3 crashes in the past 6 years. And none of them really were indicated. None of them had to do with confusion from the vehicles that were just continuing eastbound on Ward Street. They were for other reasons. So we don't have a strong crash history. We do think that this would be a small safety benefit, just for hopefully reducing the potential for crashes. But I mean, we don't feel that strongly about it, but we do think that there's a small safety benefit if we remove this sign that allows vehicles to go through or turn right, really, on the red, and replace it with a no turn on red sign. So I wanted to open it up for public comment. I know there's different opinions. And so the recommendation is we could either take no action and, everything could stay the same, or we could approve it and, put in the no turn on red sign, or we could even just do a trial and see what happens if there's concerns about backups, if you can't travel through, to make that turn on red. We could try it and see how it goes. So I just want to open it up for public comment now, and then we could continue our discussion. So Councilor Laredo, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair Kosis. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. So I'm quite familiar with this intersection. I live a few blocks away. I've lived there now for over 30 years. My wife and I traveled through this intersection. My wife travels through there on a daily basis. I actually think this is a situation where there's a solution in search of a problem. And let me explain why. Ordinarily, I would agree with you that this might be a modest perhaps improvement, but you need to understand the traffic pattern here. And by the way, this sign has been here for many, many, many years. And I'll add too that my views are supported by both of the other Ward 7 councilors. We just do not see the need for this action here. And the rationale is as follows. If you look at the picture, Mr. Kosis, can you put the picture back up that showed the actual intersection? Because I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
If you look at this intersection here, there's a tremendous amount of traffic, particularly in the mornings, that comes down from Grant Street, which is to the right, then makes a right onto Ward Street, and that traffic, almost all of it goes then left onto Waverly Ave. There's a traffic light there. There's a considerable backup at the intersection of Waverly and Grant on a regular basis, and that causes a lot of problems. It causes problems because drivers going the other way on Ward Street have a hard time turning left onto Grant. The intersection gets backed up, and you get a considerable number of cars who are literally in the intersection as they're turning right from Grant onto Ward. What this does here is it allows a relatively small number of vehicles The only folks who are really gonna make a right on red here are the residents who live in that general area, or folks going to the ward school, maybe dropping off a child or employees, all of whom are quite familiar with the intersection. You're going to have very few people coming in this way who are using this intersection to go somewhere else. It just doesn't lead anywhere else as a logical matter. And so what this allows is for people at that intersection to stop, look, if they're clear, to take a right on red and thereby alleviate some of the traffic backup here. I'll add that the sight lines there are excellent. If you're on the right-hand side next to this station wagon, you're stopped. You can look left onto Waverly, you can look left onto Stewart, you can see quite clearly if someone's coming or not, and you can safely make a right turn. You also can see anybody who might even be thinking about being in the intersection. Again, very good sight lines here. So I don't see any concern here. And I actually think the current situation is safer. So while I appreciate the constituent who raised the concern, I appreciate Mr. Kosi's statement. I don't feel this is necessary here at all. And I'll add that the crash data supports that. The accidents that were cited, neither one of them had, there were two, neither one of them had anything to do with this particular configuration. I will add, if the city at some point in the future wants to reconfigure this entire intersection, that would be probably a good idea, but that's not likely to be happening anywhere in the near future. And this proposed change is actually not beneficial. So thank you very much for your consideration. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Laredo. Jesse. Okay, I think you're muted, Jesse.
I actually like that this was brought up because actually last year I was driving my car down this road and I made a right on red and I could feel like that this was not a right turn and I could feel like that I was going right through a red light. And I actually emailed the counselor that had just spoken about this and he replied to my email with similar words as to what he just said just now. And so this intersection was just under construction with all that water main stuff, which is now completed. And I'm hoping that this intersection is paved pretty soon. And after this intersection is paved, I would like to see that the stop line on this approach be moved up and have the crosswalks be moved up. And with that, it might make it easier it might make sight distance easier. I would also like to see a painted line and two painted lanes with the right lane for right turn only. And these painted lines would help people make a curve to the left before they turn right, so that it feels like a right turn. And in relation to the concern about Grant Avenue, I would want to see a do not block the intersection pavement marking added at the intersection of Ward Street and Grant Avenue.
Thank you, Jesse. Other comments from the public? Okay. Comments from members of Traffic Council. Mitch.
So, I mean, I've used this intersection a fair amount. And I was listening to the Councilor Laredo and I guess I had three questions. One is, who was the petitioner who brought this to your attention, David? Where does that petitioner live?
I think that we heard about this from Jesse, but I also experienced it myself, so I understood what Jesse was saying.
Okay. And then secondly, do we have any idea of the volume of this not right turn necessarily, but your 140 degree, that if you were to continue, how many cars actually go through there during the peak hours, which is what I believe Council Laredo was referring to?
Well, we have counts, but they're old. We have counts from 2006. But many of us remember driving through this in 2006. And the percentages probably have not changed. I can tell you what the numbers were in 2006 if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay. So back in 2006 in the AM peak hour, the data shows that that there were 654 vehicles that traveled from Ward Street eastbound. 83% of them were taking the left onto Waverly, and only 16% were continuing on to Ward Street. So that would be 110 vehicles in the AM peak hour, or basically 1 to 2 cars per minute.
So the other question is,
And similar for the PM peak hour.
so take your choice, but during the AM, there's a pretty good backup right now onto Grant. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. There's a lot of cars waiting in the queue to be able, so if there's cars waiting to take the left, they have to wait for the green. So it's only the cars that are trying to continue on to Ward Street if they can get up to the light, because it sort of narrows and then it widens out at the light. And again, we're talking about 1 or 2 cars would be doing that probably on each cycle.
And then the final question is, it looks like there's a crosswalk. I don't know if they have crosswalks on I think I see one crossing to the other side there. Do we have any idea of what the pedestrian movement is across here?
We don't have pedestrian counts. We know that there's the Ward School is nearby. Maybe
And is
Councilor
there
Laredo
is there
knows a
a,
little more about you're probably more familiar with the pedestrian activity and the synagogues as well, right?
Mr. Costas, Mr. Fishman, I can certainly answer the question. There's a crossing guard there during school hours, so if there's any issues there. The school students are likely to be walking on the left side of Ward, not the right. You get very few students coming up there, but they have multiple opportunities to cross here. I suspect this particular crosswalk is the one that's used only by someone coming down Ward Street towards Grant, because they would cross there and then perhaps cross over again to go to Temple Emmanuel. That's a common walk. But it's just not a great number of people. And again, the sight line is such that you can see well in advance anybody who's even thinking of entering the crosswalk. Thank you.
Right.
So
So
is
it's
there-
important to know, I was just
Yeah,
going to
go
say
ahead.
that it's
Go ahead.
important to know that that there is a crossing guard here. Actually, it was the crossing guard that was one of the crashes when it was hit by a motorist. We understand traveling from Stewart Road went sort of through the light and on the wrong side of the island, which apparently happens sometimes, and sort of hit the crossing guard right there. But there is a crossing guard there to help cross the students.
But during the other times, I'm sorry, I'm hogging the Zoom here, but during other times when there's no crossing guard, is there a pedestrian, there's no pedestrian light there, right?
There is.
There is. So there's a flashing light that pedestrians can cross and all. So are all movements stopped when pedestrians move?
Yep, yeah, it's an exclusive pedestrian phase.
Okay,
Well, except for the cars could travel through the red light, but they would probably see the pedestrian and hopefully would stop.
so I'm not suggesting it at this point, but you offered 3 options, David. One was to NAN it, the other was to approve it, and the other was a trial. And I'm wondering, not that trials are easy to do and take time, but I was wondering whether a trial would be in order for, a much more limited period than maybe we normally do. But I mean, this intersection has so many moving parts. You know, even this limited piece here, which has a, 10 or 15% affected. It's not like the major movement, as we know, whether that would provide a little bit of a safety buffer. And again, I'm not suggesting at this point, but I am asking that question of all of us.
So what is your question? Could we do a trial?
Yeah,
Well, that's an option. Again, we know that the ward, at least two, or maybe all three of the ward counselors would not be in favor of, well, I'm not sure about the trial, but would not be in favor of making this change permanent. And
I would
city
just say
staff
this.
are viewing it as a small safety improvement and not very strongly attached.
Yeah, I think a success of a trial would be difficult to measure because we don't have recent data. I think to measure that, we'd have to have some sort of Q statistics and be able to compare before and after. So I'm personally not too in favor, but I do understand the idea of it.
All set, Mitch, or, okay, Jeremy?
Yep, I just wanted to associate myself with Councilor Laredo. I think he spoke very well about the pretty good sight lines and the relationship to intersection at Grant Avenue. And, we've heard before about these small safety improvements that are sort of coming out of nowhere and don't seem to be achieving much. I think it's probably best left the way it is.
Thank you, Jeremy. Other comments? Would anyone like to make a motion?
So I would move to NAN.
Okay, we have a motion to NA on this item. Any further comments before we call the roll? Okay, Danielle, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Kosis,
Aye.
Mr. Prezant,
Aye.
Captain Doucette,
Aye.
Mr. Fishman, Mr. Fishman,
no,
okay, oppose, and Counselor Downs?
Aye.
Okay, so that's 4 in favor and 1 opposed, Mr. Fishman, but
Okay,
no action necessary.
so this item is removed from the docket. No action is taken. It could be redocketed at any point in the future. So thank you all very much for this discussion.
Thank you all. Good evening.
And we were going to move on to our next item. So our next item is TC 1423. This is, oh, actually, let me just take 1 second for my records. Thank you. So our next item is TC 1423. David Kozis, Traffic Council Chair, requesting to restrict parking on one side of Ashmont Avenue to ensure safe access for emergency vehicles, as well as buses, trash, and recycling vehicles. So this is the location. This is Ashmont Avenue. This is actually right our DPW yard where Isaac and I work, where I am right now. So we are very, very close to Ashmont Avenue. We're very familiar with this street. So it's a 24-foot wide street. Sometimes there's very few cars that are parked on this street. Sometimes it's very busy with cars. Sometimes there's a lot of cars parked on both sides, even if there's only a few cars. Sometimes they're parked, even today, just today, I noticed that there were not a lot of cars parked there at 4 o'clock, but the cars that were parked there were right across from each other. So it makes it really difficult to get through when you have cars parked on both sides. A couple of weeks ago, this is what I saw. The bus could not get through. It turned around in in this driveway, I was sitting there for like 10 minutes watching this bus go back and forth and hoping that it wasn't going to hit this utility pole. It was a very good driver, did not hit the pole, but barely was able to turn around. Emergency vehicles would not be able to get down the street if cars are parked on both sides. So we docketed this, we viewed it as a safety issue. There's been other streets in the neighborhood where we've restricted parking on one side or the other for this reason. And so it's a 24-foot wide street. The utility poles are on the north side. You can see them here on the north side. Our recommendation is to approve the item to restrict parking at all times on the north side of the street, from Craft Street to Hawthorne, the whole street, and to allow unrestricted parking on the south side is only being recommended because of concerns about safety and ambulances, fire trucks. We know that there was a horrible fire that happened on this street. I'm not sure how many years ago. It wasn't that many years ago. And so that is our recommendation for safety's sake. Councilor Downs.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the size of vehicles is part of the problem here.
Yeah, well,
You know, as we get bigger and bigger trucks, you know,
well, I
we're
was
having,
driving.
and bigger vans. I mean, both of those, what I'm looking at there are two very large cars,
Yeah.
one of which is not very close to the curb.
Well, yes. So this, this was the time that I took the picture, but I would say just today, there were cars parked on both sides. Our city cars are Nissan Leafs. They're very small cars. So
Yeah.
I was able to just barely squeeze through. The cars were smaller. A bigger car. I mean, I don't see how a fire truck would fit through, even if you had small cars parked on both sides. But you're right, we do have a lot of big vehicles in Newton and across the country.
Yeah, it's a marketing trend, and I'm told you can't even, in the new trucks, you can't even fit a piece of standard plywood anymore. But at any rate, that's a different discussion. I think this is the best we can do given what we've got.
Yeah.
I will support you on that.
So all of the residents on the street were notified. We haven't received any emails. I'm not sure if anyone is here tonight to speak to this item. If anyone from the public wishes to speak on this item, can you raise your hand and then we can call on you?
Well, there is the California Street discussion tonight, which may have,
Yes,
there may be people at that didn't come to this.
right. But we did not receive any telephone calls or emails about this item through the notification process. Okay, so are there any comments from anyone on this? I don't see any. So I am going to make a motion. So I'll make a motion to approve the language shown on slide 33. There is already a prohibition on, you can see in red on the north side, there's a small section where parking is not allowed. And then there's also a little 2-hour limit along a small section of the street. The recommendation would be to remove that, the existing regulations and add the new regulations, which would just be no parking on the north side of the street from Crafts to Hawthorne. So that's the motion that I'll make. It would be TC 873. And are there any last comments before we call the roll? Okay. Danielle, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Kosis,
Aye.
Mr. Prezant,
Aye.
Captain Doucette,
Aye.
Mr. Fishman,
Aye,
and Counselor Downs.
Aye.
Okay, that's approved 5-0, TPR 873.
Thank you. And we have the 20-day appeals period. So we will be waiting until May 17th. If an appeal does not come in, then after May 17th, then the new signs would be able to be installed and then enforced. So thank you very much. Moving on to our next item, it's TC 1223. This is David Kozis, Traffic Council Chair, requesting to restrict parking on the north side of Tremont Street between the Boston City Line and Plaisted Road, the eastern end of Plaisted Road. This change will effectively only change the parking restrictions in front of 147 Tremont Street, which does not allow for legal parking beyond 5 feet of a driveway for most vehicles due to the location of the driveway, curb cuts, and a fire hydrant. Okay, so this is the area that we're talking about. This is Tremont Street. This is the Boston City Line goes right through here. And then we have these two houses in Newton. This is the area that we're talking about restricting. And we already have a restriction in front of this house where there's no parking all the way to Plaisted Road. So this is Plaisted Road. It goes around and sort of loops back. So this is the eastern end of Plaisted Road. Okay. Here's what it looks like on the ground. I measured the space between the two driveways. It's 32 feet. So, and you see that this fire hydrant is actually in Boston. It's a different color. This fire hydrant is in Newton. So you can't park within 10 feet of the fire hydrant. You can't park within 5 feet of this driveway. So it only leaves you 15 feet of legal parking space. Hardly any cars could really park there. We get tickets that are issued there regularly. Our division handles, the transportation division handles parking ticket appeals. We do the parking ticket hearings. People are getting ticketed for parking in this space. I think they try and do the best they can, but it's just not wide enough to really allow legal parking. I think we get requests from the residents nearby to enforce the restrictions here, the no parking near the driveways, so that they can get out of their driveway easily. And here's another view that sort of shows where the fire hydrant is up, 10 feet is actually beyond where the car is parked. And then you can see the driveway, and then this is a no parking here to corner sign. So we're really only talking about restricting parking from Boston in front of this one house. Okay. So that is the recommendation. Here is the language that would allow us to implement. Any comments on this? I don't see any.
That makes total sense to me, and so go for it.
Yeah, we just don't want to ticket people and then have them appeal it. And, we want to make sure that it's safe for the residents and for the fire hydrant and all that. So I'll make the motion to approve the language of TC 873 as shown on slide 38. No, that's wrong. That would be TC 874. Is that right, Danielle?
Yes, it is.
Okay, TC 874. Any comments before we call the roll? Danielle, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Kosis,
Aye.
Mr. Prezant,
Aye.
Captain Doucette,
Aye.
Mr. Fishman,
Aye.
Counselor Downs.
Aye.
Okay, that's approved 5-0, and that's TPR 874.
Thank you. Next item, TC 1023. David Kozis, Traffic Council Chair, on behalf of Civico Development, requesting discussion and possible action to change the parking regulations on a small section of Armory Street. This item is docketed in accordance with the site plan associated with the comprehensive permit number 10-22 of the Newton Zoning Board of Appeals for 1135 to 1137 Washington Street, as approved on January 11th, 2023, which indicates a cutout and addition of parking along a small portion of Armory Street. So this is Armory Street, Washington Street right here. Here's the Armory, Trader Joe's, the nursing home, I believe, right here. And here's a view with the Armory on the right, Trader Joe's on the left. Parking is not allowed currently on either side. This is, I think this is an older site plan actually, but this is still shows exactly what we're talking about. Part of the site plan that was approved would be to relocate the sidewalk onto private property and cut out the street. This would be public, within the public way, an area that parking would be allowed. Okay. So that was already approved, and I think it's our obligation now to change the regulations to match what was already approved as part of the site plan. So our recommendation is to approve this docketed item. We would be removing the existing parking restrictions on Armory Street and replacing them with these new regulations. So in that little cutout, we would have, what ended up being approved on the site plan was an accessible parking space and then a 15-minute loading zone. And so these are the measurements that we worked out. And so this is what we would be voting to approve. The accessible parking spaces is sort of already listed in the regular regulations on the street. It's also called out in a different section of our traffic and parking regulations. So it's sort of repeated here, but you have the one accessible space and the one loading zone space. And it can be appealed within 20 days. So that is the recommendation. I am going to open it up for anyone from the public who might be here to speak on this item. Maybe I covered everything, but let's see if anyone has a comment on this.
Did you put the map up one more time?
Yes,
Thank you. Okay, and then the map of the proposed changes was, I think, 2 further?
this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right, okay.
Right. So this is what the armory is going to be, the sidewalk, and then the cutout, which will be an accessible space and a loading zone, a 15, or is that right?
Okay.
Yeah, 15-minute loading zone.
Okay. That seems very sensible.
We also
Should be
have-
done ahead of time.
So these spaces are also part of the site plan, but they're on private property. So these would be reserved for the building.
And we have no parking in front of them already, correct?
Right. Right, so that wouldn't change. It's still no parking on Armory Street in front of these spaces.
That makes sense.
Okay, so seeing no public comment, would anyone like to make a motion?
I will
Oh,
move that-
sorry, I do see public comment. I didn't, I had
Oh,
to
you do
click
see
click
public
up to
comment.
see,
Go ahead.
I had to click up to see Jeannie. Sorry, Jeannie.
Oh, that's okay. I think Sam's here too, from Civico, if he wants to say anything, but, yeah, I just wanted to double check, because I know I got involved in this, way early on and so most of the ZBA approval, is Armory two ways? Two-way?
Yes, it's a two-way street.
So these cars, this space and the loading zone are sort of on the west side, on the way back up the street towards Washington Street, correct?
Yes,
For parking. And I think I remember in the description, either that Sam gave me or you did, so the accessible parking, the loading zone is first as you're coming back up the street to find these spaces on Armory. And then the accessible parking space is in front of the loading zone?
the accessible space is closer to Washington Street and the loading
Okay.
zone is behind it.
But they're not touching each other?
They're next to each other.
Okay, they are. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's good because it actually, affords some little space behind the accessible parking space, which we don't always have. Because I'm hearing about more accessible vans or just any, using a rear entry for deploying a ramp. And can you tell what, maybe Sam does, what width of the sidewalk it is where the accessible parking space is going to be?
And so I'm trying to remember the final site plan.
I know, I was trying to remember that too, actually.
Remember that it included the accessible space and the markings, the pavement markings, the signage, a ramp, the accessible ramp,
Yeah,
and then,
okay.
then the loading zone. I
Okay.
don't have the dimensions of the sidewalk. It's probably on a slide that I don't have right here, maybe.
That's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just hoping it
Jeannie,
was 8 feet or so, just
Oh,
like an
maybe
access
maybe
aisle.
Sam was trying to speak.
Oh, yes, Sam.
Yeah, just the sidewalk dimension is 5 feet.
So it's pretty minimal. Okay, okay. And is there some space between the parking space and the sidewalk? Because usually,
No.
you know, we tried, I mean, we can't always promise this because it's existing spaces, but often a van could park there and have a side entry, and then they need closer to 8 feet.
Right.
Okay.
And let's also not forget that this is still gonna be in the public way. It is still an accessible space that could be used by anybody.
Yeah,
Someone
I
going to
know.
Trader Joe's could
wouldn't
use
just
it,
be
someone
van.
going on the bus could use it, you know, someone going into the Armory building could use it.
Right, yeah, and I think it's good to put it, at least one there, like you said, because of the little more activity than the usual that's gonna be there when there's 43 dwelling units created. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Did I see someone else's hand before? Maybe I didn't. I don't, does anyone else wish to speak on this? I don't see anyone.
Uh,
Oh, yes, Mitch, maybe that was
Yeah.
your hand before. Yes.
Yeah, I know it's not our purview, but is there going to be a crosswalk between the, you know, at the end of Armory Street to Trader Joe's side?
I think a very significant pedestrian improvement that was part of the Dunstan East development, which is now sort of slowed down, is a pedestrian hybrid beacon, or the flashing actually, I don't remember if it was a hawk signal. Do you remember, Isaac? To cross Washington Street right near this location at Trader Joe's. I don't remember if it was a hawk signal or a flashing.
I think it's
rapid
just an
flashing signal.
RFB. Yeah,
Yeah.
David, I think it's only an RFB.
Yeah.
It was gonna be a hawk.
Hawk,
good.
okay.
Maybe
So it's
it'll
gonna
come
turn
in.
red. So hopefully that's still gonna happen. That's a big safety improvement for people who will be living in this building, you know, and trying to get to the bus stop across the street, or people parking across the street and trying to get to Trader Joe's. Was that your question, Mitch?
No, no.
I think it was about
My question
crossing.
was whether on this side
Armory
of
Street.
Washington Street, I mean, particularly where you have an indent parking area, it just seemed to be safer for pedestrians. I mean, presumably they're parking there. I mean, as Jeannie said, it could be anybody parking there, and they could be using Trader Joe's. And why wouldn't they have a sort of a crosswalk to at least guide them? But maybe the crosswalk's part of the Armory plan. I don't know.
You mean, is there a crosswalk
Yeah.
right here?
Yes.
Like they could park in the loading or in the accessible space or something,
Yeah.
where hopefully if they're in the loading zone, they're not crossing anywhere. They're probably hopefully loading. Hopefully everybody parking here is going to the Armory.
Okay.
Right? But I don't know, right? I mean, Isaac, can you look on Google Maps real quick to
Yeah, I
see if
mean,
there's a
there-
crosswalk right here?
There's not a painted crosswalk, but there are old Apex curb cuts there.
It might not be a bad idea.
Okay, I think that we can look at that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Okay, well, I would like to make a motion then to approve the language of TC 875 as shown on slides 43 and 44, to add the accessible space and the loading zone 15-minute space. Any last comments? Okay, Danielle, can you call the roll, please?
Psicosis,
Aye.
Mr. Prezant,
Aye.
Captain Doucette,
Aye.
Mr. Fishman,
Aye.
Counselor Downs.
Aye.
Okay, that's approved 5-0, TPR 875.
Okay, and of course, we have our 20-day appeals period. It probably will not be appealed. But of course, we won't be implementing these changes until the construction's complete. So it's approved now, but is on hold until it's ready to be implemented. So thank you very much. And we're gonna go on to our last item then of the evening, which is TC 1523. David Kozas, Traffic Council Chair, requesting to discuss and vote to change the parking regulations on JFK Circle in front of Haywood House. So this is the new Haywood House, almost done. It's hopefully going to be opening soon. We could see as part of the approved site plan, there was, similar to the last discussion item, we have a cutout right in front of the Haywood House. So you see this sort of long curved area that has ramps and these posts. This area right now on the books is no parking anytime, right? Because it has been narrower, but now it's been widened to allow for some use of the curb right here. And so that's why we docketed this item. So the this, we also had to, because it was an approved part of the site plan, right? So the recommended parking regulations are shown on this slide. So for this area in front of the Haywood House, we're recommending live parking at all times. The thought is that we would have the ride vehicles, or we would have, Numo vehicles leaving the Lexington Street lot and coming over here, picking people up and waiting in this live parking area for their passengers to come in and board there. We don't want anyone turning their vehicles off. We don't want anyone going into the building. I also understand that this is going to be an Amazon Dropbox location for the building. So we would expect deliveries throughout the day, probably very quick for the driver to just put the items in, they're not even going into the building, but they're putting them in the Dropbox that's going to be right there. We also wanted to sort of clean up the regulations around this horseshoe. It's not really wide enough to allow parking on both sides, especially with the more intense use. So right now, there's really no restriction on this section. For example, you could park legally on both sides. People really don't, because they would be completely blocking access, although I have seen people park on both sides. We want to make sure that it's safe. So we're recommending no parking anytime in these areas shown on red on the outside of the horseshoe, and then sort of switching over to the inside of the horseshoe. This is where we have a lot of driveways, and the parking lot over here. There's more curb space on this side where we would be allowing parking in the area shown in green. The outside of the horseshoe, then transitioning to the inside. And of course, we also have the same restriction that was implemented on several streets in Nonantum for the Nonantum street sweeping, the no parking 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. the first Tuesday of the month. We heard that item a couple times recently. A traffic council approved that. So it's also an additional parking regulation on JFK Circle. So that is the recommendation. And here's just a slide that shows, as an example, where a sign would be posted with no parking anytime, to sort of clarify that you can't park on both sides. This is where we have the driveways and the parking. And our recommendation is to approve this item. We would be removing all of the parking, all of the regulations on JFK Circle, and replacing them with these newly measured out regulations, including the live parking only, all days, all times, outside of the horseshoe, and then the specific distances as, measured out to reflect this slide on page, what is this page? Page 47. Okay, I think that's it for the presentation. If there's anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this, I see Christine, but maybe I covered everything. If anyone wants to speak, just raise your hand and we can call on you.
I'm trying to find where the raise the hand is on.
Okay,
this.
well, we can hear you, so go ahead, Christine. We just need to know your name and your title, I guess.
Yep. hold on, Christine Long, Newton Housing Authority, Capital Improvement Coordinator. I just want to thank everyone involved with this for bringing this forward. Parking on the street, I think this actually works better than what's existing there. We did meet Amy Zaracki, and the executive director, and myself did meet with David on the site to discuss this. So we're agreeable with it. And again, it makes perfect sense, because why would you want parking in front of our parking lot anyhow? And I've been there for the last 2 weeks, just about every day, all day. And as David has so articulated so well, that typically there's not parking on both sides. People usually just park on actually kind of where you've already got it outlined. So I think this works, and appreciate having the visit to come down and see Haywood House and see what's going on with parking.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you guys for meeting with me.
Yep, no problem.
We do have one email that I want to be sure to mention. We have an email from Terry Sorrow, 44 Cook Street, Unit 1. So all of the members of Traffic Council received this email. She is asking about the live parking. She says in the email that if we allow live parking, an Uber, a Numo live parks with the motor running, but asks how long can they park. A resident may take 5 or 10 minutes to get to the Uber, etc. And she also mentions that her second concern is that there's not enough parking for residents, nevertheless visitors. And she's also separately was wondering the parking lot that's on, right nearby, right near the street. There's a parking lot that was constructed. If that parking lot would be open to visitors or if it's restricted to residents. So I wanted to mention, and I didn't know the answer to that question. So I wanted to mention this email that came in. This was the only email that we received.
So is she referring to the parking lot where you have the no parking anytime in front of our parking lot?
I think that yes, there's a parking
Yeah.
lot right near this pole,
Yeah,
right?
so that parking lot specifically, it's not for visitors, that's for Haywood House residents.
Okay, that's what I said. I thought that would be the case.
Right, so we typically, when CNAs or any kind of visitors come to the current site at Jackson Gardens, they typically park on either Jackson Gardens or Jackson Road or Kennedy Circle, or I think it's Cook Street that runs further down. So a lot of our residents do not have vehicles, so it has not really been a problem for JFK residents.
Right. And I think that the email came from a Cook Street resident that maybe is concerned about parking on Cook Street.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other comments on this item?
This is Jeannie.
Yes, Jeannie.
Yeah, actually, after I read Terry's email, I was curious, and again, I looked at this project many years ago. Can you tell me how far someone, if they did park in that, if that's the closest parking lot, if they weren't able to find a space where you are allowing parking outside the building, how far a resident would go to get to a parking lot and a parking space from the
Well,
entrance?
I mean, there's parking allowed right across the street. from the
Okay.
building, right
Right.
on JFK Circle. We have parking allowed on one side of JFK Circle. It's not necessarily always going to be available.
Yeah.
It is unrestricted, except of course for the winter parking ban and the first Tuesday of every month between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m.
So, I mean, it is probably more for visitors, as Christine said, more than the residents who could park in the parking lot. Are there any accessible spaces in the parking lot, which there should be? Just one anyway for accessible parking, and if this is a very busy area, I don't know if it is, or people are searching around for an accessible parking space. I don't know that for sure, but I'm just curious more about the parking lot since that is for the residents and I was concerned that there'd be people possibly driving. I know it's a mixed income building now and may have a car and may also have a disability.
Christine, do you know about the accessible parking
Yeah,
spaces on
there's
site?
accessible parking space. I believe there's 2 in that small lot
Okay,
that you were pointing to the right, and I believe there's another couple of accessible on the other side of that. And I will tell you that typically, even though that parking lot looks big, that we have the dumpsters on where there's no parking, that parking lot's pretty much empty most of the time.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so I wouldn't say that, you know, because people, I'm sure that people that visit probably do park in there and no one says anything because maybe some of the tenants don't have vehicles. But I guess over time with Haywood House, once it is fully occupied, we'll see what happens. But
that's what I was thinking too, with
Yeah,
the 55
right.
apartments, that you might find that to be more than full, not more than full, but more full than you see it now.
Right.
Yeah, how many spaces are in that parking lot in the first
20
place?
So I believe we have supplied 23 spaces
In the parking lot?
in the parking lot for Haywood
Okay.
House.
Okay, cool.
So I do know that while I was at, I think it was last week, a fellow came by looking at Haywood House, and that was for him a deal breaker because he felt like there was going to be not enough parking to be able to occupy the new site.
Yeah.
So, because he definitely needs to use a vehicle, but typically a lot of our residents just don't have vehicles.
Right.
Are the spaces
Thank
assigned
you.
to specific residents, or just if you're a resident, you can park in any of the spaces in the lot?
We assign the parking spaces.
Okay, so some people get a parking space and some people don't. And then there's the new parking spaces that were added off of, is that Green Street, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So we'll see what happens.
Okay,
But somehow it always seems to work out, fortunately. And I think also because Newton does have ride share and a lot of them take that advantage of using either Uber or whatever you call it, Numo. We have WRTA in Framingham, so I think that comes out to Newton too. So,
yes. Just
Yeah,
lower.
I mean, I over time have advocated for sometimes for a parking space, either for a PCA or someone who you know isn't able to do the distance between their unit and where they have to park. So that's all I was asking, is if there's going to be enough parking, not for 55, because I know it was a much smaller percentage, not 100%, that we just had it and that we cover it with some accessible parking. So that was just my question. But I think it sounds like that your arrangement of the live parking maybe, you know, will be helpful for drop off pretty much, or pick up.
Right.
I will say one other thing about that before you sign off. As you know, we have reasonable accommodation requests all the time. So if someone does experience a hardship, we would have to figure out how to accommodate that.
Yeah, and it would be, and we
Which we-
can't, if that's a public street, it'll have to be in the parking lot.
In the parking lot, correct.
Right.
But I will say we've always managed, so we always take care of our RAs.
That's great.
So,
Thank you.
thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Christine. Any other comments on this? Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the language of TC 876 to reflect slide, I guess, slide 49. Yes, slide 49. Right, so any last comments before we call the roll? Danielle, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Kosis,
Aye.
Mr. Prezant,
Aye.
Captain Doucette,
Aye.
Mr. Fishman,
Aye.
Counselor Downs.
Aye.
Okay, that's approved 5-0 TPR 876.
All right, thank you all for a good meeting. I know that we're not going to have any meeting in May. We don't have a meeting date yet for June, and we don't really know if we're gonna have one meeting or two meetings in June. But enjoy the month off. Not all of us have the month
Hardly.
off, right?
Who has the month off?
I guess you
David?
maybe I do a little bit.
Maybe
All right,
you do.
thank you
Go-
all very
go-
much.
Go travel. Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Have a good night. Bye.
Thank you.